Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to this lecture on information systems. This lecture is broadcast on Swayam Prabha channel 16. This is in the series of information systems. This is lecture number 7. In this lecture, we will look at a very new and hot technology which is creating a revolution in business and other fields called blockchain. In this lecture, we will look at the basics of blockchain. Among the many technologies which are causing a revolution in business, finance, governance, and various areas is this technology called blockchain. And the technology is still developing, the applications are still developing. In the series of information systems, we have seen what information systems are, what are the components, what are the infrastructures, and the applications of information systems and the technologies that drive information system are what are useful for us in the field of business. This lecture is mainly meant for students of BBA and MBA, but others also could learn many things about the latest technology profitably. So with that, we shall get going on diving deep into this field called blockchains. In this, blockchain has many aspects to that, and in this lecture, we will look at just the basics of what blockchains are, the varieties, and what are some sample applications. In other lectures, I will cover details of blockchain, including the newer applications, specifically one class of applications called cryptocurrencies. As mentioned earlier, this lecture is being broadcast on Swayam Prabha channel 16. These are some of the, when we say blockchain, these are some of the terms that all of us might have heard in our various interactions with technology. You might have heard of terms like Bitcoin, you might have heard of terms like Ethereum, digital currency, cryptocurrency, smart contracts, hardware wallets. These various terms you might have heard of. It's important to understand that most of these terms, the technology which drives most of these terms is called blockchain. The World Economic Forum, as far as in 2016, had declared blockchain as one of the top 10 emerging technologies. And on a daily basis, we are hearing new and new applications coming up on blockchain. So let's take a look and try to understand what exactly is blockchain. How is it going to be useful to us? In fact, the term blockchain has become so much in public discussion these days, it has even entered the realm of cartoons, as this particular cartoon says, where even consultants and various technology evangelists are pushing this concept of a blockchain. Let's start with just the very basics. What exactly is a blockchain? To start with, it could be described as a distributed, tamper-proof public ledger. Each of these parts is important: distributed, tamper-proof, and public, and ledger. Those of us who have studied accounting, essentially students of BBA, BCom, MBA, various other fields, understand what a ledger is. It is a record of all the transactions while conducting the business. For example, if a business buys an item A from business B, there will be two entries. There will be one entry for having bought the item. There will be one entry for having paid for the item. These are the two accounting entries, and both the entries will go into the public ledger. The public ledger is used as a foundation to draw various financial documents like profit and loss statements, balance sheets, and various things. So essentially, a ledger is a book of all transactions which are done while conducting any business. And blockchain at heart is a ledger. It's a record of all transactions which are conducted within the domain of that particular blockchain. Second part is public. Most kinds of blockchains are accessible to public. The ledgers of a business, the books, what we call as the bookkeeping books of a business, are only available to the owners of the business and to public authorities like chartered accountants and various enforcement authorities. They are not public otherwise, they are private in that sense. Whereas most blockchains tend to be public, accessible to most people. There are other varieties of blockchains too, which are not public. We will take a look at it slightly later. The third aspect is it is tamper-proof. If we write a ledger by hand, for example, we could erase that entry and make correction entries. Or on computers too, we can delete an entry and make a different entry. Whereas in blockchain, whenever there is an attempt to change a transaction which has happened already, once a transaction enters into this blockchain's ledger, whenever there is somebody tries to make a change, the change will either not be allowed or it will become visible. So that if somebody makes a change, somebody conducting a fraud, for example, may want to go back in past and erase a transaction and then put a new transaction in its place, it either is not allowed or it becomes public. Even the attempt to make change becomes public. So conducting fraud on this ledger, making changes retrospectively, is practically impossible. Again, there are exceptions and certain situations where such a thing might be possible, but by and large, a blockchain is tamper-proof or tamper-evident. It either stops us making any unauthorized changes, or if somebody does make those changes, they become visible so that others who are interested in unraveling that change can go back in time and find out who did and what and things like that. And last aspect, most blockchains are distributed. That means, we will see how it works. In a blockchain world, there may be 50 participants, 100 participants. For example, those of you who might have heard of Bitcoin, there are literally thousands of people doing transactions in the Bitcoin world. And anybody who is doing a transaction in the Bitcoin world will have a complete copy of the public ledger. And so, look at the advantage of this. All of us have the copy of the same ledger. And if somebody attacks one copy of this ledger, somebody hacks into another person's computer and hacks their ledger, they have to change the ledger of all the other people who have a copy of that ledger. So again, it's practically impossible to hack and change one particular copy of the ledger so that everybody else's gets distributed. Or block access to that. If one person's computer is blocked, to block access to the entire blockchain, you have to block all the other copies of the blockchain too. So a blockchain at heart is a ledger. It's a record of transactions. It's predominantly a public ledger available to everyone. It is tamper-proof and it is distributed. Everybody who is participating in that blockchain, in any given blockchain, will have a complete copy of that public ledger. And all the advantages all the above features, being tamper-proof, being proof against attacks, distributed attacks, being proof against hacking, all these features, all the good things about blockchain, come up due to three key characteristics of a blockchain. This public ledger, it has three characteristics. One is, it is decentralized. By and large, every one of us have a copy. Any one of us can make entries to that ledger, and any one of us can verify that if a person is trying to make an entry, that entry is correct. In that sense, it's highly decentralized and democratic. All the participants have equal rights in maintaining that ledger. Why do we maintain that ledger? Different blockchains offer certain kinds of incentives to do that, and we will see what those things are. But one of the key features of a blockchain is it is decentralized. No single person controls a blockchain. If you look at, say, our monetary market, the currency market, there is one central authority who controls everything, the Reserve Bank of India. Whereas in a blockchain-based currency like Bitcoin, there is no single authority like Reserve Bank which controls the flow of transactions, creation of the transactions in the Bitcoin world like it does in the real world life with Reserve Bank of India. There's no one single person, whereas every person is eligible to do those transactions. Number two, any addition, deletion, any addition to or any change to a blockchain happens by consensus. When more than 50% of the users of a given blockchain, again, let's go back to Bitcoin. Incidentally, many people use the term Bitcoin and blockchain interchangeably. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. The technology which drives the Bitcoin is called blockchain. So blockchain is independent of Bitcoin. Blockchain is applied in so many other situations also. That's what we are looking at. I'm going to use Bitcoin as an example. So any transaction which happens on a Bitcoin gets recorded in its ledger only when more than half the participants agree that it's a valid transaction. So number one, blockchain's operations are decentralized. Number two, all the changes, transactions happen only when, by consensus, only when more than half the participants agree that it is a valid transaction. How the consensus achieved itself differs from blockchain to blockchain. There are many methods to do this. There are two predominant ways how to do it. We'll look at both of them later. And the third part, how is a blockchain safe? How is it tamper-proof? How is it somebody cannot hack into that? How is it somebody cannot go read and change things? These features are enabled in blockchain by this science called cryptography, the art and science of encoding information so that only the right people with the right key can see the blockchain, can see the correct information, others cannot. So the three pillars, decentralization, consensus and cryptography, provide a foundation for what a blockchain does. That is being a public ledger, being tamper-proof and being distributed and accessible to everyone. The next characteristic, transactions are time-stamped. As in every transaction happens, the time at which it happened gets written as part of the transaction so that later on somebody cannot enter the same transaction by trying to overwrite the previous transaction. Because at any point, if we see that there are two identical transactions, then the transaction which happened first remains, the other transaction gets removed. How does it happen? Because the time of transaction is stamped. It is written into each transaction. We say transactions are time stamped. Thus, we can make sure that a transaction gets written only once and subsequently somebody cannot just go and overwrite it. The original transaction always remains. Of course, it's assumed that once a transaction, for it to be entered into the blockchain, people have to agree to that. Everybody has to agree that it's a valid transaction. Then it gets written into the blockchain with the time at which the transaction happened stamped onto that. And the next characteristic, what makes blockchain tamper-proof, is forward updating. That means we cannot go back in history and change a transaction. Even in accounting, though physically we can go to a ledger, physically erase it and rewrite a transaction, accounting principles most of the time say we have to pass a counter entry. Suppose I credited account A and debited account B, and later on I found out that it's a mistake. Most of the time we have to pass one counter entry debiting account A and crediting account B to restore the previous situation, so that we have a record of both. So blockchain ensures that by making sure that any transaction we do can only be done in a forward basis. We cannot go back and change something. We have to change something means we have to go to the current situation and pass a counter entry. That is, if, to go back to the example, if account A is credited and account B is debited, we realize it's a mistake. In a blockchain, we cannot go back and erase the transaction. We have to pass one more transaction on the blockchain, recording that we are debiting A for X amount and crediting B to restore the situation. So this feature makes blockchains very strong protection against fraud. We simply cannot go back and change transactions. And why is it called a chain and why is it called a block? You'll see that pictorially in the next slide, like this. But essentially, a block is a bunch of transactions. As I said, it's a ledger. And what does a ledger have? Ledger have all individual transactions. In a blockchain, a block is a bunch of transactions. A given block, depending on which blockchain it is, can have 10 transactions, can have 10,000 transactions, can have 5 transactions, 1 transaction. And a blockchain is a set of such blocks linked to each other, so that when a blockchain at any point, once we see the ledger, we can follow this chain of blocks and find out when the first transaction happened. Again, to take the example of the Bitcoin, if you have the Bitcoin public ledger, anyone can download it. You can follow that ledger and find out that when the first transaction on Bitcoin happened. And you can open in different blocks and find out when that first transaction happened all the way in history, because each block in a Bitcoin blockchain contains approximately 10,000 transactions. They all are attached to each other as in a forward going manner. So if I get hold of the current block of Bitcoin, and if I can always verify, go back in history and see when a transaction happened, when the first transaction happened. If somebody gives me a Bitcoin, I can precisely follow using this chain of blocks, go back in history to find out how this coin was generated, who owned it. So that's why it's called a blockchain. It's a chain of blocks, each block containing a set of transactions being added over a period of time. So that's why it's called a blockchain. And it's called a hash chain because the blocks are encrypted. They're coded using a technology called hashing. One-way technology it is called. At this point, we only need to know hash is a type of cryptography that is predominantly employed by blockchains to encrypt the data so that only participants within the blockchain have access to that. And the blocks are linked to each other over a period of time. And other characteristic is every blockchain will have only one chain. A block A links to block B links to block C links to block D, all the way. If there are 10,000 blocks existing today of any blockchain, block number 1 links to block 2 links to block 3 links to block 4, all the way up to block number 10,000. And potentially you can see that like a tree, it can branch into many branches. But a blockchain by definition will not let that happen. The chain will have only one uninterrupted chain. It's possible that at some point, if 2 people try to add a block, suppose we are on block number 10,000. N number of people are trying to add block number 10,001. If 2 people manage to add block number 10,001, whichever authorizes the longest sustains and the other one gets discarded. We will see that example also a little bit, which will make this very clear. So at this point, you need to know that at any point, only the longest chain stays. There's only one chain of blocks in any given blockchain mechanism. And most public blockchains by nature are open so that anyone can download that blockchain. We can search for transactions. We can browse for various transactions. We can browse through all transactions. We can search for one specific transaction. And we can, if somebody tries to make one more transaction added to the block, we can verify whether it's a valid transaction or not. Blockchains are highly open in nature. And the key benefit that a blockchain provides is it disintermediates the trusted middleman with a person-to-person mechanism. Let me explain this in a little more detail. In any business transaction, there will always be a third party who guarantees that it's a valid transaction. If I buy a pizza from another person, how do we enforce the contract? I give a piece of paper, which we call as a currency note. And who guarantees that? The central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, guarantees that this transaction becomes valid because that person has given me that pizza and I have given him an instrument, a piece of paper, which a trusted middleman guarantees. It intermediates, the Reserve Bank intermediates and guarantees to the seller, accept this piece of paper because I guarantee that it's worth so much, 100 rupees, 500 rupees or whatever. If I use my credit card, for example, I go to the petrol station or I even take the same pizza. I go to the pizza parlor, I give my credit card. In terms of my payment, it is just a piece of plastic. But the swipe, when the merchant swipes, it goes to their bank, the bank goes to the credit card company, whether it's a Visa or a MasterCard or whoever it is, that credit card company assures the seller, pizza seller, saying that give the pizza to him, it's a valid credit card, I will collect and give you the money. So the trusted middleman, whether it's a Reserve Bank of India or Visa or MasterCard Or if I buy a plot of land, we go to the registrar's office to register the deed. Why do we do that? The registrar guarantees that person A who is selling me the piece of land is the actual owner of that land, and thus I can give the money to the person A and get a piece of paper essentially representing the land and change the name of the owner of the land from person A to my name. So the transaction of me giving money for a piece of paper which denotes a piece of land, it happens in the real world because we both trust the sub-registrar. There is the trusted middleman. As we see in each case, there is a cost to the middleman. The sub-registrar's office, for example, charges stamp duty, which could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6% of the entire transaction. The credit card company to guarantee charges typically about 2% of the cost of the transaction. There are similarly costs to running the currency system. So that adds to cost of the system. Whenever the business happens, because between any two parties, because there's a third party which acts as a trusted middleman. I trust Reserve Bank, you trust Reserve Bank. I trust Visa, the pizza seller trusts Visa. I trust the sub-registrar's office, and the seller also trusts the sub-registrar's office. That's why business transaction happen between any two people. I can buy and sell pizza from anyone whom I have never seen, I have never met, but I can trust them because of this middleman. But there's a cost to that, cost to this middleman's giving that trust, providing that trust. But the blockchain provides the same level of trust by removing the middleman. It removes the middleman. If I buy a pizza, I make an entry in the blockchain, you can go and verify that that entry is mine, I own that Bitcoin, and thus you can give me the pizza based on the assumption. Because of these various characteristics of being time-stamped, forward updated, tamper-proof and all, you don't need a third party to verify that the Bitcoin I'm giving you in place of the pizza you are giving me is valid. You can always go back to the blockchain and verify that I actually own the Bitcoin and the transaction happens properly. So the blockchain, it disintermediates, it removes the middleman. I can deal with any third party whom I don't know by being able to verify the transaction on the blockchain. This has very significant and profound relevance to the business world. That's why people are so excited about blockchain. It lets anybody in the world interact with anybody else without having come across, without any middleman or any trusted middleman, because the blockchain provides the trust. It provides the trust by being able to, for all of us being able to verify that transaction. And it significantly reduces the cost. And applications are innumerable. One reason why people are very excited about this new technology. Continuing on, so we have this chain of transactions. Transactions are bunched into blocks. Each block links to the other. It has various other good properties like being tamper-proof, forward updating, all those things. So now, as new transactions happen, say on Bitcoin, they need to be captured, put in a block and added to the last block, linked to the last block. And on top of it, as transactions happen, we need somebody to verify. You are selling me a pizza and I am giving you 0.1 of my Bitcoin for the pizza. Then we need people to verify that I do own the Bitcoin, you have delivered the pizza to me. Hence, write this entry into the blockchain ledger. What should the blockchain ledger do? After I receive the pizza, among the one Bitcoin I have, it would reduce 0.1 of that Bitcoin from my entry. It should add it to your entry. So now I have 0.9 Bitcoin in my entry after this transaction. Anybody goes into the blockchain should be able to see that you have 0.1 of the Bitcoin in your name. Somebody should be able to verify that, and somebody should take the transaction and add it to the block. And somebody should be able to take, when the block is full, take that block and add to the blockchain. By definition, most types of blockchains are such in nature that anyone who has access to the blockchain, some or all members can add blocks and verify validity based on transparent rules. What are the rules on which these transactions are valid? For each blockchain, it has very clear transparent rules, and by following that, anybody can add, verify and build blocks and add blocks. This activity they call it as mining. We will see that a little later. And as I mentioned earlier, security and integrity. That is, nobody can simply hack blockchain and make changes. They say formal methods to do, and that's not by hacking, by following the process where your transactions get recorded in a very transparent manner. So blockchains cannot be hacked easily. The blockchains are very hack proof, and unauthorized people cannot make change. So this is ensured by using cryptography. It uses various types of cryptography. There are many types of them. Two predominant types it uses are called hashing and uh, asymmetric cryptography or public key infrastructure. There is asymmetric cryptography, it is called, that and hashing. Just need to know. You don't need to go into detail of what, how, where they do it. We just need to know that blockchains deploy a variety of cryptographic techniques to ensure that data is secure and the integrity of data is not affected. And as I mentioned, most of public blockchains, some are more, all members can add blocks and others can verify blocks. Why do they do that? Because there is an incentive for doing it. So most blockchains give an incentive scheme for the general public to go and maintain. If nobody maintains the blocks, nobody adds the new transactions, the blockchain will fail. So most blockchains have some kind of incentives for people to verify, construct blocks and add blocks to the blockchain. And the various methods of incentivization are there. There is something called proof of work and proof of stake, and various other schemes are still coming up. Again, we'll see that a little more of those a little later. At this point, let's take a brief pause and recount what we have studied. So far, I hope to recollect, we have seen what blockchains are. They are public ledgers which are tamper proof and distributed. Most blockchains are public where they are maintained by the public. That means blockchains are as a record of transactions. Ledgers are a record of transactions which are put in blocks of certain size. Each block is linked to the other, and blocks can go in only one direction. We cannot go back in the past and make changes to the blockchain. And in most cases, anybody in the public can go verify new transactions that they are happening, put them in a block, use cryptography to encrypt them, add them to the previous block. Most blocks have some various incentive methods for incentivizing the members, people who are in the blockchain system, to do all these activities, do the maintenance activities, verify transactions, put them in a block, put that in the, join that in the blockchain, and make sure that all the transactions are distributed. They are distributed blockchains. And blockchains are very difficult to hack. They are tamper proof and they are public. Their big advantage comes from the fact that in the real world, business happens between any two people. It can happen between any two people who don't know each other because it's always guaranteed by a trusted middleman. Like in the case of business using cash, the trusted middleman is the Reserve Bank or any central bank, which guarantees that when you give me that pizza or a box of mangoes, the piece of paper I give you is valid so much. It's valid 100 rupees, 200 rupees and all. And you trust it because the bank guarantees. The Reserve Bank guarantees that it's worth so much, otherwise bring it to me. I'll make good. If I use a credit card, I can use a credit card at any petrol bank I stop on the way. That person accepts my credit card because the credit card company guarantees. Accept this piece of plastic, I'll verify and make sure that you will get your money. When I buy a piece of land, we go to the registrar's office to get it registered, where the registry entries tell me that piece of land was owned by A, so that if I give them some 50 lakhs or whatever, I can safely give that money to them because the registry guarantees that it belongs to them. And the registrar's office also changes their name to mine. So if I can show it to somebody when I want to sell my piece of land, saying that, look, the registrar's office has given me this piece of paper, they authorize that this plot of land here belongs to me, so you can safely buy that plot from me. In all these cases, this third party who guarantees the transaction is what is called a trusted middleman, and we have seen that it costs a lot of money. It costs money. It's in case of land, for example, the stamp duty may be 6%, 7%. So if I buy a plot worth 1 crore, 6 to 7 lakhs would be spent on getting the transaction registered. So blockchains bring that trust. The third party provides the trust between me and any third party. Blockchains bring that trust by eliminating the middleman. How do they do that? They are public. All transactions are there. They are tamper proof. Nobody could tamper with the transactions. So I can always go to the ledger. If somebody says that he owns this Bitcoin, or if you have put land records on a blockchain, if somebody says he owns this plot of land, I can go to the blockchain, which is holding those records, and see for myself whether this person does own, or has he sold it to everybody. Has this person sold a land to somebody and gives me a set of forged documents? Since blockchains cannot be tampered with so easily or they are hack proof, I can go and verify in a blockchain that yes, this person does own that piece of land. So I don't need a trusted middleman. It's not as simple as that. There are more complications. But in concept, that's what the blockchain does. It eliminates the middleman, does the transaction much more by making every transaction being open to verification. I can trust you because I can verify your transactions. So that brings a lot of power. It makes the transactions quick, removes the middleman, removes opportunity for fraud, and so many other benefits. That's the reason why so many people are so excited about this potential for blockchain. So it's worthwhile to study this phenomenon in more than one lecture. Today we'll just look at some of the basics. So I hope at this point the basics are clear. Blockchain is a set of public transactions. It's encrypted. It is tamper-proof. It is distributed in a public. Everybody who wants to be part of the blockchain can get a full copy of all the transactions, and it eliminates a middleman by making transactions completely transparent and completely verifiable. Let's go back. So that is the basic of a blockchain, but as always, there are many varieties and nuances to that. So let's look at some types of blockchains. One way of classifying a blockchain is by the ownership of the blockchain. And the second way is by the authentication. How do we access a blockchain? Not everybody can walk into every building, right? Not everybody can walk into every house. There are ways and means of providing authentication. You cannot log into any bank system unless I provide my ID and password. So, to take an example here, the website of my bank, HDFC Bank, is owned by HDFC Bank, but authentication is by providing my account number and my password. So those are two ways to classify. So blockchains based on ownership can be classified as public or private. They can be public blockchains, they can be private blockchains. Public blockchain is like what I've been talking about. It's owned by anybody and everybody. There is no single owner, and everybody can participate in that. The private blockchains are blockchains set up by individual parties who own that. For example, all the big banks are looking at. The big international bank JP Morgan Chase has set up its own blockchain. JP Morgan Chase owns that blockchain. So it's a private blockchain. And in terms of authentication, blockchains can be permissionless. That is, no permission is required to access the blockchain. Anybody can download, anybody can verify, following transparent rules. Anybody can add transactions to the block. Anybody can add blocks to the blockchain. They are called permissionless blockchain. There are rules on how do we do that. The blockchain itself controls those rules. But beyond that, anybody can do all these transactions. They are called permissionless transactions based on authentication. The other variety is permission blockchain. The blockchain is there with its rules, but not everybody can access those blockchain. We need permission to access that. So by using these two criteria, we can see that there can be four types of blockchains. One variety is the public permissionless blockchain. It's available to everyone. It's owned by everyone. No single person owns it. It's publicly owned by all the participants, anyone. Anyone can participate in that blockchain. The famous Bitcoin is built on top of a public permissionless blockchain. As I said, today many people use the words Bitcoin and blockchain interchangeably. Bitcoin is the cryptocurrency, blockchain is the technology underlying that, and Bitcoin's blockchain is a public permissionless blockchain. The other common variety is a private permission blockchain. One variety is public permissionless, the other variety is private and permission. For example, I gave the example of the blockchain developed by this bank, JP Morgan Chase. It's private because JP Morgan Chase owns it. It authorizes for the people who can make changes and probably does it itself, does all the maintenance itself. And can anybody access it? Not unless the bank gives us that permission. If I am an account holder with JP Morgan Chase, they may give me permission to access their blockchain. So that's an example of a private permission blockchain. It's owned privately. Whoever can access that can be authorized to enter the blockchain, do all the transaction. Then the third variety is a public permission blockchain. This is an interesting case. The blockchain is public. Anybody can go see and all, but to enter it, to make changes on all requires permission. Which examples can we think of? A few years back, there is a news item which caused a lot of stir in the public, and it turned out later on not to be so fully true. But if that news item was fully true, that would be an example of public permission blockchain. The news item was that in this country called Sierra Leone, an organization used a blockchain to conduct and verify the votes in an election. Think about it. I vote online in a public in an election. My vote gets recorded in a blockchain, and this is a public permission blockchain. All of us should be allowed to access the blockchain and register our vote. In that sense, it's public. But can anybody go and make entries to the voting blockchain? No, only the election commission should be allowed to verify that I have voted for the first time, I am a valid voter, and I have voted only once. I am not voting multiple times. Only the election commission can verify that and record that my vote. Once my vote is recorded, I should always be able to go back and find out how my vote was recorded. My vote was recorded at this time, and I voted for so and such a party or such and such a candidate. So it's a combination of public and permission. The parts, once my registry of my voting is public, the capability to go back and find out whether my vote has been recorded correctly is also public, which reduces significantly the chance of manipulating or rigging the vote. Whereas the permission part comes in where the central authority, like the election commission, validates that, verifies that I am a verified voter in that country, and I am voting only for the first time, only time. I am not allowed to do multiple voting. Here is an example of a public permission blockchain. It's accessible to public, but the access is controlled for certain activities. It's a permission blockchain. The fourth combination, private permissionless blockchain. Examples are a bit tougher. For the sake of example and to show what kind of power is possible with blockchains, let me give this example. I can set up a blockchain within my own family. Let's say we are a family of 5 people, me, my spouse, and 3 children. We all want to record our financial transactions on a blockchain. So every month, if I give 1,000 rupees to each of my children as pocket money, I can register in there. I can set up a blockchain and register. I make that entry into my blockchain. So at any point, all my children can always go back and see whether 1,000 rupees has been deposited to their pocket money accounts. And whenever they spend anything, they make an entry out of this blockchain, and I can always go back and see what they are spending it upon. Since this is a blockchain only for my family, only for 5 of us, and I know all of them, we trust each of them. So I can make it into a private blockchain. It's a blockchain only accessible to our family. My neighbor does not need to know what we are spending money on, and there is no permission required to make an entry to. Remember, we cannot go back and make a past entry. Those rules still hold. For any new entries, no permission is needed. It's a very trivial example I have taken to show that this variety of public permissionless blockchain, but it also shows you the power. It can be set up for a small private group like a family level at family. Still, we can I can make sure that I can always go back and verify what my children are spending their money upon. My children can always verify that on which day I gave them their pocket money. So, as trivial as this example sounds, it illustrates the power of a blockchain. So, blockchains can be of 4 varieties: public, permissionless, public, permission, example of Sierra Leone; private, permission, example of JP Morgan Chase; private and permissionless, my family blockchain. So, that's roughly the basics of a blockchain and how it operates. Also, the small examples I have shown shows you the power of blockchain. So let's now dive a little deeper into what it is. This is how a blockchain works. There are a lot of technical terms used here. Don't worry about it. But let me briefly explain the basics of a block itself and what a hash chain is. As I mentioned, a blockchain is a set of transactions. So as and when, let's take Bitcoin itself. So many transactions happen in a Bitcoin. Some party gathers all the transactions. Let us say each block in a Bitcoin has 10,000 transactions. So any party, the moment it crosses 10,000 transactions, they do all these operations, don't worry what they are, and they build this block. They put 10,000 transactions and put them in a block. And they take a summary of the previous block. This is the last block. They take a summary, encrypted summary, a brief summary of this block, include that here. Here is the transactions, all these transactions, 10,000 transactions in an encrypted form. Here is the summary of this block included here. Then you put a timestamp and encrypt the whole thing. Encrypt the whole thing, attach it to this block. So at any point, I can go back and locate which is the previous block. Because I have the summary, I decrypt it, record this summary. I decrypt it, record this summary. That way, at any point, as the block goes forward, you can always go back in time and find out what the transactions are in the previous blocks. That's how blockchain grows. Various users capture all the transactions, put them in a block, encrypt that, take a summary of the previous block, include that, put a timestamp, encrypt the whole thing and attach it to the previous block. This also shows why tampering with it is so difficult. If I want to go back, for example, I have come to this block, one block further ahead. Somebody wants to commit a fraud. That means they want to change a transaction. They bought something with 1 Bitcoin. They want to go back and change it. They want to make it appear as if that Bitcoin is still in their name. That transaction happened in this block. What do they have to do? They have to go back from this. They have to go back to this block, decrypt it, locate that particular transaction in this block, change that. Once they change it, the summary changes. So they have to go back on this block. They have to open this block, replace the summary. Then they have to go back to this block, replace the summary. When we have to come to this block and replace the summary, only then and only then they can fool the world and say that they have not used that Bitcoin here in this block already. But the beauty is opening this block and getting across the summary, changing the summary, putting it back, and then opening this block, getting the summary, changing it back and putting it back. Each of these transactions takes the same amount of time. So the time it takes to capture 10,000 new transactions, putting them in the block, is the same as the time it takes to go back and change one transaction here. So by the time I change this block, one more block would have been added here. So when I change this block, one more block would have been added here. So I probably can never catch up. That's why it's practically impossible to change. Until I complete this, my entries don't get accepted. So for me to conduct a hacking successfully, I have to constantly keep going and changing all the blocks. They're getting added all the time. So hacking a block is a very simplified version, but that's an example of how hacking a blockchain is not easy. So in essence, this is how a blockchain works. Transactions keep happening. Somebody captures those transactions, encrypts them, puts them in a block. They take a summary of the previous block, puts them in the same block, put a timestamp, and a cryptographic hack called a nonce, cryptography feature called a nonce. They encrypt the whole thing, attach it to the last block, last known block. At every step, there are third parties who also verify these transactions are valid, and I am the right person to do all those things are there. And the block keeps growing in one sense. I also briefly showed how it is practically impossible to go back in time and change a transaction. And this chain of hashed blocks that cryptography uses called hashing, they're all hashed blocks. It's called a hash chain or a blockchain. And in general, not all, especially the public permission-based blocks, are incentivize themselves. There's an economic incentive for public permissionless blocks to maintain themselves. In case of, let me take a brief break here. The most interesting types of blocks today are the most prevalent ones are a public permissionless blocks. That is, nobody owns them. It belongs to everyone. Everyone does maintain. Everyone has to maintain that. And why would somebody maintain it? If it's a private blockchain, not a problem. the party which has created the blockchain will also incentivize to maintain the blockchain. They will maintain the blockchain. In case of public permissionless blockchain, the burden is on every one of the participants to maintain the blockchain, to make sure the transactions are valid, to make sure they are encrypted, to make sure that they are added in the right order. So many blockchains, for example, Bitcoin. How does Bitcoin sustain itself? Why would somebody maintain the Bitcoin? I may not own a Bitcoin, but I can go and maintain. I can go verify transactions, build a block, and add that block to the Bitcoin blockchain. That activity is called mining, which we will see in later classes later. How does the Bitcoin maintain this? It maintains by providing an economic reason to do that. It gives an incentive. So this is commonly done by many public permissionless blockchains, especially cryptocurrencies. They remain independent and publicly owned by incentivizing all the participants to maintain the blockchain. That provides the economic foundation. So for people, there is an economic reason to participate in the blockchain. So, and in the case of Bitcoin, as it happens, if I help maintain the Bitcoin, verify the transactions, encrypt them, successfully add to the next block, I get an incentive in the form of Bitcoin itself. I get a reward in terms of Bitcoin. So that provides an economic foundation for the blockchain to maintain, self-sustain and maintain. It also makes sure that all of us have an incentive in keeping a copy of the blockchain, of the ledger, making sure that all our ledgers are synchronized with each other, various other things that are required for maintaining. It is not true in the case of private blockchains and other types of blockchains. In case of public permissionless blockchains, this is a very key feature. It gives an incentive to maintain the system, so it essentially maintains itself. Let me go back again. So that's how public permissionless blockchains are self-sustaining by offering an economic incentive. There are two types, the two ways in which they offer this incentive. Who should be the person who should be eligible? In a Bitcoin type of blockchain, there are literally thousands of users, and all of them are collecting transactions. Who should be allowed to add the next transaction? Because there's an incentive. If I add the next Bitcoin block, I get incentive in the form of 12 Bitcoins, 6 Bitcoins, some measure, and each Bitcoin is worth thousands of dollars. So how do I add? How does the system select whom to allow the addition of the next block to do the mining? Who is allowed to maintain the block? Because there's an incentive, all of us are competing for that incentive. There are two types of algorithms most blockchains use. One is called proof of work. Whoever has shown that a miner has done the sufficient amount of computing work. Adding a block requires a lot of computing work, and if I can prove that I have done that amount of work, a complex puzzle I have solved, that to add a Bitcoin, and all the other users verify that I have done the right amount of work, then I am allowed to add a next block and I am rewarded for that. So when as I build a block, that is called mining, I capture transactions and I build a block, other users are verified and I am allowed to add. The key is building the block is very tough. It takes a lot of computing power to build a block, but very easy to verify. So the moment I build, others can very easily verify that I have the right block. So both might get incentive. I may get some incentive and they may get some incentive. This is called proof of work. I have shown that I have done the required amount of work to be eligible. I am the first one to do, to be eligible to add the next block. Others verify. I am able to add the block and I get an incentive. The other variety is called proof of stake. That is, a miner who is allowed to add the next block is selected randomly, but it is not just plain random like a lottery. It's called a weighted random system. Those who own the highest stake, for example, in the Bitcoin world, those who own the highest number of Bitcoins have the highest possibility of being selected. They are not guaranteed, but the chances improve if you own higher and higher stakes in the system. It is called proof of stake system. There are so many other methods also for incentivizing the building mining mechanism, but this is how public permissionless blockchains maintain themselves. They have an incentivized system. Depending who, they use different algorithms to select whom to allow to add the block and give them the necessary required incentive. Two major methods are proof of work and proof of stake. And this is a simple diagram of showing how the blockchain transaction works. The person A wants to send money to B. The transaction is represented online as a block. As I remember, I showed every transaction is shown in a transaction within a block. It's not a block, it's within a block. This transaction is broadcast to every party in the network. I want to send money to B. This fact that I want to send money to B is broadcast to everybody in the block. Those in the network approve that transaction is valid. For them to approve the transaction, what should they verify? That I have the money, A has the money. So it is recorded in the blockchain. Anybody can go and verify that A does possess, say that 10 bitcoins to send to person B. Then what should happen? The number of bitcoins held by A should be reduced by 10. Number of bitcoins held by B should be increased by 10. So any party can go and verify that person A has those 10 bitcoins. It is transferred to person B. Now person B has 10 additional bitcoins, person A has 10 minus bitcoins. So they all verify that this transaction has happened. Then the transaction gets added to the block, and the block itself gets added to the chain. The block can be added to the chain, which provides an indelible, difficulty erase, and transparent record of transactions. And the money moves from A to B. So in the future, after this time, anybody can go and verify that these 10 bitcoins were with person A, they were transferred to person B, and all these parties verified that it's a valid transaction. So at the end of it, we can be sure if A claims that he has 10 more bitcoins, you can disprove that because there is a record of person A having transferred to B. And if B claims that he has 10 bitcoins, you can agree because the transaction is also there. That is how every step in a transaction gets recorded in a blockchain. The block itself gets added to the chain. At any point, any party can go and verify. It's a very simplified transaction of a blockchain. There is one more concept called a smart contract, that is a contract which happens only when certain conditions are met. Let me briefly exchange it in this way. Person A wants to sell house, person B wants to buy house. So the exchange, like Magic Breaks or sub-registrar's office or a broker, anyone, they match the buyer with the seller, the exchange. So the contract, the assets are registered in this contract, and a contract takes and distributes it to the seller, and they both get entered in the registry. Once it gets entered into the registry, then the entry fires back, and the document changes the name only when the person deposits the money into the bank. The name on the document, person B deposits the document with the exchange, person A deposits the money. Only when the money reaches the bank, this contract fires and transfers the money to person B and changes the name of the document to a person A's name. So this contract fires if and only if this document is delivered in good condition, verified condition, money is delivered to the bank. Only when both of the things happen, the transaction fires, money goes to person B, document with the new name goes to person A. This is called a smart contract. Contract fires only if and only if both conditions meet, and that gives additional power to blockchain. It enables, blockchain happens completely in the e-world, in the electronic world. None of us see anything. So how do we verify that documents change hands? How do we verify that money changes hands? This happens by putting a smart contract on top of a blockchain. Smart contracts are what give real power to the blockchain. I can give a simpler example. I want to buy pizza from a pizza parlor. I give them an order to them and tell them, send me the pizza. They send me the pizza, and I put my currency, Bitcoin, in the escrow, a small account. And a smart contract is set for that. The pizza delivery man delivers the pizza to me, and the moment I sign for the delivery on the tablet, then the contract fires. It ensures that it guarantees that I have received the pizza. Only when I receive the pizza do I sign for it. Once I sign on it, the contract fires and deposits that amount of Bitcoin from the exchange to the pizza parlor. So smart contracts are which give real power to a blockchain. Make the blockchain contract enforceable. We will see more of this in subsequent lectures. With that, we come to the end of the blockchain. Let me briefly get back. So with the time today, with that we come to the end of lecture number 7. Blockchain is such a vast technology and developing so fast, you could just touch the surface today. But I do hope you understood the basic concept of what a blockchain is, how useful it is, how it works, what are the advantages. Some of those advantages and disadvantages we'll see in more detail in subsequent lectures. But probably by that time, I hope you all appreciate what a powerful new technology it is, and the additional technologies on top of it, like a smart contract, are what actually give it the real power. And applications of blockchain are exploding like anything. The most common and the first applications were cryptocurrencies. I hope to dedicate a complete lecture to that. Other than that, all the way to a trivial example of setting a blockchain for my own family is possible today. So we can use them to make transactions transparent, verifiable, remove the middlemen, and make it cheaper and faster using this new technology. That's a key reason why everybody is so excited about this concept of a blockchain. There are many aspects to that, many examples of applications. We will see them in future lectures. With that, we come to the end of this lecture. Thank you. This was lecture number 7 in the information system series. This was about the basics of a blockchain.